everyone, welcome to the channel. I am Max, the RHMax channel, here to bring you the first of maybe more debates. You never know if this thing goes well. There may be other debates hosted in the future. However, today the inaugural the change debate, as I've coined it, because I really didn't know what else to call it. So you got a couple people here with opposing views, and this will be it'll be a fun conversation, I think. Again, this is the ability. There's no winning, losing, whatever. I think we all win if we're just able to have open dialogue and discuss these types of things. But hey, hopefully it's entertaining, informative. Again, some big changes happened around Hex in the front end. Again, well, some people call them big, some people maybe say not so much. So essentially, I'll let everyone. We have a format here. I'll let everyone discuss their opening positions and all the stuff like that. But again, chat, please keep it civil. Do not say anything crazy, bizarre. Otherwise, constructive criticism, very much welcome. Please put your questions or interesting comments that you want me to address in the chat. I can't promise I'll get to them both or get to all of them during the conversation. Try to go for about an hour or so. I think there should be enough time to cover it. But yes, if you have anything interesting, put it in the chat, and we'll try to get to it throughout the conversation. Share the stream if you're interested as well. I know Katie and Goldkey and I've put it out there as well. Other people want to join in, listen, or otherwise contribute. But again, this is not going to, it's a family-friendly show. As Airfred Somebody says, not going to turn to Jerry Springer. I'm going to make sure of that. And if it does, we'll just call it a day. We'll end it early. But I think it'll be interesting. I hope you all came here to learn and have a open conversation about this key issue, which or at least became a key issue. One of the many changes that's happened in the ecosystem over the past few months or so since been trending one way or another. So without further ado, welcome to the show, back to the show, Goldkey, and for the first time, KatieeP. How's it going?
How's it going?
Welcome back, Goldkey. And Katie, how's the latency there? Is it tolerable? Is it getting any better? How's it going?
It's bad.
I feel like it's better. We were in the green room testing it for a bit. And I'm like, oh God, I hope it's not 5 seconds. Otherwise, me and Goldkey could adjust for it as well. But sounds like it's a little bit better. It sounds like the internet in Australia is okay from time to time. You talked about it like as a third world. I don't think it's a third world, but you're like, I think they're okay. No. But we all have internet problems from time to time, myself included, especially. Jeez. So. All right, I'll introduce the format here, and then we'll say a friendly hello to each other, and then we'll get into it. So again, chat, have questions, comments, otherwise constructive. Don't even ask to say, don't say it. But if it's constructive criticism, totally okay. I'm going to be posing questions from time to time as they both engage with each other on the topic, and the first thing I want to do is just get you both. We'll let Goldkey go first on the opening remarks, and then we'll let Katie go first on the closing remarks and statements and stuff like that, just to make sure. I know, very professional, right? Very professional. So yeah. So first of all, could you all just talk to each other and say how much you love being around each other in the community, and how we're going to grow from this experience?
Yeah, I mean, before we hop in, I just want to say, Katie, you're awesome, and I respect you for taking the debate. I think you were like one of three people that stepped up. So props to you. And yeah, I look forward to it. And yeah, this is completely friendly. We built it up a little bit, but overall, like as a debate, just a good conversation. Not trying to fight. I'm actually here to like talk about solutions and how to make things better. But yeah, looking forward to it.
Awesome.
Katie, obviously, I have a great deal of respect for you too. I really like what the guys at Maxi are doing, you and Dibcatcher. I think both of you bring a hell of a lot of value to the community. So I want to start by saying that. And yeah, I put my hand up for the debate just because, it's interesting. And I think both of us would have two different views, so to speak, right, on the topic. So I think it could be a valuable discussion. But obviously I am pro Richard Hart and the changes. So,
I honestly, behind that smile is a smart cookie, and it's I am looking forward to the debate. But I am curious, like from your tweet with the pro Richard Hart tweet, like Katie, is there anything that you've ever disagreed with that Richard Hart has done in the past before we hop into like the bigger discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm always like fond of some of the things that he does, or maybe like says on stream would be a little bit more to the point, you know. But at the end of the day, people are who they are, and I don't think people should have to change to please a small minority, right? So you are who you are, and I think you have a right to express that, right? Like you shouldn't be censored because you feel like some form of consensus that you need to. But yes, I have disagreed with some of the things that he's done before, but in terms of like moving towards decentralization and privacy, no, I'm all pro that.
Awesome.
It's the ecosystem of freedom. Yes, it's definitely what we're turning into, at least. I do like that aspect. All right, like I said, we start with Goldkey opening statement, and if you could state your position clearly, you know, it doesn't have to be you know, a long one, like we can get into the points and otherwise in a bit, but just your opening statement, your position, so everyone knows like what you're thinking on the issue. Oh, sorry, I didn't introduce the issue. So real quick, my bad. Hex front end has changed recently. If you've been living under a rock, go.hex.com now has links instead of hosting the front end for staking and everything we've loved and cherished for the last few years. It now has links to decentralized sources and also links to download desktop apps for your computer to run it. And essentially, and I'll let them explain the positions and stuff, but there's an ideal. Some people like that, some people don't like that. And that's what we're going to get into today. So apologies. Now that everyone knows what we're talking about, Goldkey, the mic is yours.
Yeah, for sure. I think before like diving into is having the front end hosted on hex.com good, like I think something I've seen come up on Twitter is like, is this conversation worth having? And I think it is, for like two big main reasons. The first is kind of obvious that I've stated. I think that having the front end hosted on hex.com is a huge net positive for Hex and its continued growth. And that's coming from someone like you mentioned that has built an alternative staking solution. So, you know, I could selfishly like this and you know, applaud it, but I want native Hex stakes to thrive, and I think hex.com is a huge part of that. And the second point is kind of like on a broader crypto scale. I think that being allowed to host a front end is kind of an important battle for DeFi in this kind of war against the government for our rights. And Richard Hart in the past has kind of identified this, and with the government wanting to make front ends illegal. So I think that is something that we need to put our foot down and kind of rebel against. And I think the way to do that is by making a stand and hosting front ends, even when the government says you can't. So, you know, as a person that I look up to in Richard Hart, I would love to see him kind of be on that, you know, battlefront as well. But yeah, I mean, I think that what we're going to find from this conversation is that we actually do agree with that. The things that have become available to users does enhance the decentralization of Hex. I think it's just a matter of how that is presented to the user, and the overall user experience of hex.com can be improved. So I'll end there, and then hopefully, you know, maybe next point I can kind of dive in why I think that you know, having the front end attached to hex.com is good.
Awesome.
Sure.
Katie?
If your next point's going to be about the front end for hex.com, then I will just start with the hosting, I guess. So like you just brought up the point of bringing down front ends and bringing down centralized websites, right? So for people in the audience that don't know, when you host a website on a traditional server, like a DNS system, right, it's one centralized server. So when you type in like google.com, you ping the DNS system and the system goes and gets the IP address and pretty much just displays you the website, right? So computers can't read names, they just read numbers. And that's kind of like the single point of failure, though, right? Because you're now reliant on a centralized server that can censor you, block you, pull you down, and it falls under the jurisdiction of wherever that server is. So the SEC or the government can put forward to that centralized server that they have to censor or pull down your website. So there's issues there. And then that DNS system, right, and that centralized server actually logs your IP address every single time you ping the network. So in terms of privacy, using traditional DNS systems is really against human rights, right? Because the number one right is privacy, and that's what Richard keeps fighting for. So every time you use one of these centralized traditional servers, everything to do with your privacy and your right not to be censored is constantly on edge, right? So what he's done is replaced the DNS name service with an IPFS hash. So IPFS is like a decentralized alternative to domain name services and to traditional services. So it's also immutable in a sense, right? So if you upload content to an IPFS server or system, it gives you a hash, and that hash is the representation of the content, which is always retrievable for it, right? And that hash is pretty much tamper-proof, because if you make any changes to the hash or to the content, I should say, in the IPFS network, then it has to give you a new hash. So if you're uploading something to an IPFS server and you have a hash, right, and then you're displaying the content from that hash, you know that it's immutable. Nobody can ever tamper with it, and that the code and the content that's on the IPFS server can't be touched in any shape or form, right? Because if anybody was to try to do something, they realistically have to upload the content again, or they would get a new hash. So you know this content is immutable, untouchable, and you know that for a fact through the hash. And then you also have the fact that the IPFS system is, I guess you'd call it like a protocol. It's pretty similar to a proof of stake consensus network on a blockchain, right? So instead of one traditional like just main server on like a DNS system, IPFS is housed by nodes around the whole entire world, right? Anybody can run a client for IPFS. So it's a decentralized network of nodes. So you can't necessarily say that one of those nodes aren't logging your IP address, but you can be guaranteed that you're now interacting with a network that is more decentralized, it's more tamper-proof, and it's more privacy orientated. So for me, when I look at what he's done, it's replacing a centralized server where you are prone to censorship and privacy attacks and trying to replace it with something that's a more decentralized alternative.
So you bring up a few different points: decentralization, privacy, security. Yeah, Goldkey, do you want to respond to any or all of those?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that explanation. That's really good information for people to know. And on that point, like, we agree. I think that the availability of IPFS backups and also being able to run it locally on your computer is amazing. But I don't think that, basically, I think that it was just poor execution on the user experience for providing those options. So, I mean, I would love for go.hex.com to be rehosting the front end, but if not, I at least would like the just the hex.com site, when you click mine, to actually go to the IPFS site directly. Right now, you land on a page with a bunch of links. And if you're familiar with like user experience, like that's just a bad user experience. No one knows what IPFS is. Like, people would need an explanation like Katie just gave to actually understand what that is, but that isn't on the site. It's not explained. It's just, here's IPFS, and it's like technical. So I think it was just like a poorly executed way to offer those options. So personally, I would love, yeah, again, like the go.hex.com to go directly to an IPFS site. And that would do, Katie said that that's what replaced it, but it isn't what replaced it. A site with links did. So directly to that site. And then what I would, if I were to design that site, I would actually have a pop-up before someone actually got to the DApp of showing all the available options with explanations. Because I think that is actually what makes Hex decentralized. I've been having kind of debates with people that say, you know, the taking down the front end made Hex decentralized, but that's actually not true. It's the availability of options, which Hex has had for a long time. I don't know how long you've been in Hex, but I mean, back in like 2021, I saved a tweet. Richard Hart said, excuse me, Hex.com, as usual, does everything better and for years. Front ends from different devs on different code on different hosts, totally decentralized. And then he listed the available front ends at the time. And since that time, even more community sites have been built, which is enhanced decentralization. And now with these backups and locally running, like that greatly enhances the decentralization of Hex. So I completely agree. It's just a matter of, is what GoHex.com is the best that we can do? And I don't think it is. I think it's a bad user experience, and I think it hinders the growth of Hex.
Well, just to clarify too, so are you saying that if the go.hex.com mine link or whatever went to the IPFS system, is the position like you should still keep the front end go.hex.com originally, but have those as backups, popularize them, whatever, or is it just a UI thing?
I personally, again, would love go.hex.com to just be the DApp, but if we are trying to push towards decentralization, I think a redirect would be fine to an IPFS. Although like the thing with IPFS, like the URLs, like it's hard because we teach people like be very wary of links. So when you don't have a URL that you can like look at and be like, oh yes, I know this is a good site to go to, it does open kind of another risk factor of like people creating, bad links. And so I think it's kind of sacrificing that for this decentralization of an IPFS site, but I would be fine with that. I think, my main concern is just the user experience of the site that people go to when they want to stake.
The normies too, especially like if you're just not a tech person, you go to the site, you expect it to be centralized, right? You expect to go there. Hey, here's the interface. Here's all the stuff. I trust this. It's got the SSL cert. Everything's green. Good to go. I can imagine friction on onboarding. You go to the site, go to hex.com. I'm going to stake my new Hex. Hey, here's a bunch of links, first of all. And even if it was a bunch of links, if it actually went to the decentralized one, now you got a crazy URL from IPFS. Maybe that gets renamed. Maybe that gets fixed or something later on. But like right now, I mean, there's a lot of polishing there too. But Katie, on those points, like why not host the front end and just have all the decentralization for everyone else who wants to use it? Or if something happens, Hex.com, it goes down, why not just have both?
So I think Goldkey touched on a few things. And the first thing that he touched on was the locally hosting. So one thing that the community don't understand too, so for people that are watching, when you locally host something on your computer, you remove the ability for somebody to log your IP address. So if you still use an IPFS link, right, which still takes you to the hash, but it's still hosted somewhere. So the fact that it's hosted somewhere, you're now saying, I trust this person that's hosting the IPFS hash to not be logging my IP address, right? So browsing non-anonymously online. Whereas if you locally host it on your own computer, then you know for a fact that nobody is tracking what you're doing online, right? You know that your privacy is completely intact. Nobody's tracking your IP address or logging your browsing data, right? It's just solely on your computer. And locally hosting is actually normally difficult and something that most people can't do because you have to set up the environment yourself on the computer. So what they've done is actually just built a zip file where it's all done for you. So that's the first thing. That's more of like a privacy focused thing. So again, even those IPFS links at the top that can take you to the front end, you're still like trusting that other entity that's hosting it isn't logging your IP address, where the below is like a full privacy orientated version to do it. But then you also brought up like the front end and making it easy for people. So when I look at the analytics, right, 90, I think it was like 97, and maybe in like the last month, it's moved up to 99% of Hex interaction is on Twitter. So our entire community is on Twitter, right? And that's like YouTube, LinkedIn,
Wait,
all of these different
stat?
things. 97 to 99% of the entire Hex interactions are on Twitter, our entire community. So Luna Crush actually logs that information as well. I think you have Luna Crush Goldkey. But like that is a huge portion of our community. Like I think 1.9% was on YouTube. So the fact that 90-something% is on Twitter already means that, say for instance, icosa.pro, right? Well, most people that are staking Hex, they like Hedron, right? If you're onboarding people, you're going to teach them about Hedron because it's a sales prop to Hex. So in my opinion, why would you be going to gohex.com realistically for your onboards? Because most people get onboarded to staking through us, right? And again, one of the value props is Hedron. So it's not necessarily going to be this front end that you're sending people to anyway. And then if you want to look at like SEO traffic on our websites currently within the community, so gopulse.com, right? Really amazing site. They have great analytics, but over 90% of their web traffic is actually from pulsechain.com. So if you go look at any SEO statistics site on, like, you know, they're all public knowledge. You can go look at any of them. I think it was like 95% of their entire web traffic is from pulsechain.com. So GoPulse is like owing their entire success story to Richard Hart through the link that he's put on their main website. And that's in the back end. So for me, I look at like Liquidity, for instance, and I look at those statistics that I just said about GoPulse. So Liquidity is known to be one of the most decentralized protocols available on Ethereum because partly they shill everybody else's front end links, not their own, right? There's like rumors that maybe some of them are built by the team, but most of them are just built by other people. So their main webpage is, here's a list of all the front ends, go visit them and see which one you like, right? So for me, I think if you're moving over to a website that's going, here's a bunch of really cool community built websites and alternatives. And then you have icosa.pro, which realistically is probably the number one onboarding tool and place that you send people anyway, right? So for me, I look at it and go, I understand your perspective that you want to just land on gohex.com, right? But if you look at it as a whole, it's a form of education that just needs to happen again, which is all around Hex anyway, right? Like, most people don't stake Hex or they don't understand it. It's solely reliant on us onboarding them. So if you go, you have options. You can have your IPFS hash, right, which is a decentralized alternative, but you still might be at risk of your IP address being logged on a server. Or you can locally host it on your computer. It's like another 3 buttons to press, realistically, download a zip file. And then you know for a fact that nobody is logging your IP address, right? Throw on a VPN on your computer and your locally service provider won't be doing it either, right? So now you're fully anonymous online. Or icosa.pro is really cool because we all like Hedron, right? You mint it for free. So again, it's a value prop. And then icosa.pro, for me, I'm always going to talk about it and I like it because it's the marketplace for encapsulated stakes, right? So when I onboard people personally, I go, you can stake Hex, or you can go look at alternatives, which is buying some off the secondary market, which have already gone a certain amount of length, which is the same as Maxi, right? So if you guys were to get a link on there, it would help you. Or if you were to team up with Alex and put Maxi, for instance, on icosa.pro, you know, it's moving more towards community driven and the community being in charge. If you go back and look at Liquidity again, as part of their success story is being that fully decentralized protocol that's community run.
Okay, few good points in there. I know you probably took a note on a couple too. I just want to mention the brand awareness. Do people even go to hex.com? How much does it matter that it's hosted there? They're going to click on the link. How much does it matter? They see all that versus going to app.icosa.pro, which is what a lot of pros, at least in our community, go to. And then also the question here I want to get to when we get to it too, the decentralization factor. How much does it not being hosted on the website affect or help our decentralization of the community and regulations, all that stuff as well?
Yeah, so I don't know anybody that sends their new onboards directly to icosa.pro. It has zero information about Hex. I'm pretty confident almost everybody sends them to hex.com because that's where you can actually learn about the product. Not to say like app.icosa.pro is an awesome site and I know people love it. I use it to mint my Hedron. But I don't think it's where most people send their new onboards. I think, and so like to your first point about like the community engagement, it happens a lot on Twitter. I think you're making a false assumption that everyone that uses Hex is on Twitter. It is a big community on Twitter, but there's a lot of people that use Hex that have found Hex organically just by searching on Google. And when you search on Google, the first site you're landing on is hex.com. So that user experience for that organic traffic is really important, because that will determine if that person buys and stakes Hex. So if you're putting your mind in that perspective of like, if I'm a new person that maybe heard about Hex and I look it up and I go to hex.com and I land, after trying to learn like everything about Hex, like landing on that site with all the links and like what's IPFS, like it's a lot. And so I think it's really important to try to keep it as simple as possible. And you know, again, that doesn't discredit, like, I think the thing we continue to agree upon is like the fact that we have so many community built sites is amazing. That's what made Hex decentralized on the front end from the beginning. It was really important and something that Richard Hart bragged about a lot. But I'm definitely thinking more on the growth side of Hex. And I think on our last stream, RHMax, like we talked about how there's not solutions, there's trade-offs. And that's kind of where we're talking about here. Like the trade-offs we're willing to make for privacy versus user experience is a big one. And, you know, I think that you can have the best of both worlds. If, you know, with the solution I provided previously, with like offering those available options while also providing like a seamless, smooth experience for new people to hop into the dApp and stake.
How many people have you onboarded that you haven't had to walk them through everything?
I've onboarded a lot of Uber drivers and people that I explain Hex to, and I send them to hex.com. And you know, hex.com is a very effective site, and I loved it, and it's worked flawlessly for 3 years, and it's been a big piece of the success of Hex. And so, you know, I think that's why I'm not against change. It's just about like bringing the change in the best way possible to, you know, push forward decentralization for Hex, but not like, you know, sacrifice too much on the user experience front.
Yeah, I get that. So like for me, of course you send people to hex.com too, right? But at the end of the day, when you look at statistics again, I think it's like over 55% of the world are visual learners. They aren't readers, right? Because people struggle to digest information when they read it. So they are visual people. So they will go to YouTube to look for videos, to have somebody explain these things to them. Kind of like if you look at the statistics, I think it's like 85 going on 90% of the world actually digest information at an 8th grade level. So if you do something highly sophisticated, or you don't use analogies, or you don't simplify a certain like topic, right? They're not actually going to be able to literally digest what you're telling them, or what they're reading, or what they're trying to learn, which is like a crazy statistic, because 8th grade is like a really low IQ. But that's in an attention-driven world what people retain or learn information at. So, like, I get what you're saying, but anyone that I talk to that's looked at hex.com, they've always gone to YouTube or they've gone to Twitter to find out more information about Hex, because they just still don't get it. So that comes back to our education. And that's what people have been doing for years, right? Like if you look at Hex and you look at the growth story of it, nobody understood it in the start, right? Everybody just thought it was trash and it was a scam. And the community got together and they had to educate everybody about it and teach them why and how, and this is what you do, and this is how the math and the contracts work, and this is how it's immutable, and this is why it's better. You know, it's like a constant, ever-growing learning curve. And same with like Hedron and Maxi, like you just constantly add more things on top of our community. And yeah, it's like a barrier to entry to onboard people, but they also become value props for our community. Like each individual thing that you now have to teach somebody, it still adds direct value to why our community is better, right? To put forward our ethos and community consensus of what is real DeFi and what is decentralization, and why does it matter to you, right? Like, so for instance, if you jump on gohex.com, it's just one click and you can go to the next page, right? Which is the staking front. And if you hit the IPFS, so it's realistically just one click and it's at the front. Maybe because it's an IPFS hosted site, you have to tell your firewall to shut up and just let you through, which could be seen as an issue. But like if you're directly onboarding somebody, I haven't met somebody that I've onboarded that I've actually not had to tell them these things, or go to hex.com, or go to hex.com, read it. If you want to press this, go there, or go to app.icosa, or go to YouTube and see all these things. So the barrier to entry for me is us, right? It's always going to be us. It's our job to educate people. And I think privacy is a huge, important issue, especially in 2023, right? And like, you look at the SEC now, for instance, coming after Richard and front ends and all these other different things. All they have to do is run one mandate in that jurisdiction, whether it's the SEC or whether it's the government, right? It doesn't matter, whatever the jurisdiction of the centralized server is. And they can run a mandate that server has to censor and take down that website. That doesn't even make sense anymore. And I can't name the websites off the top of my head, but that has been done before, and it's been done in crypto, where they have moved forward and put a mandate in that says this server has to take down this website, and they've done it. You can also, it happened in the Hex community too, and I can't remember which website it was, but a lot of people put in a bunch of complaints about a certain website in the community. I think it was a Uniswap front end, and had that website taken down, because that's all you have to do is do X amount of complaints to one of these servers, right? To one of these hosting people, providers, quality complaints, of course, and then they will take down the website. Like, that's complete censorship. So if you're moving towards decentralization, you just have to start educating people again, right? And it's like, if you go back to value props, everything that we do is a value prop. It's just a matter of how do you relay the message to people so they understand that it's directly benefiting them.
Just one point on that, Goldkey, too, that I'd like to hear your perspective on is, does this ruthless separation of, non-security, not any of this stuff, regulators go away by decoupling Hex.com from any kind of platform, making it all decentralized, and that maybe being the trend going forward? we talk about PulseX or something in the tweet, I think a week or so ago, how that goes.
Yeah, I did put out a poll like right after the Hex front end got taken down, asking people, should Richard Heart take PulseX down as well? And I think over like 1,000 people voted, and like 73% said no. And it was a rhetorical poll because there isn't a difference between the PulseX front end and the Hex front end. And I would love for a solution for PulseX to be able to run it locally on your computer. I think that's a great initiative, and I think that having IPFS backups would be another great initiative to get up. But at the same time, like, I think everyone can agree that having a front end attached to a trusted URL is a good thing. Luckily, PulseX, there are some community front ends already being built, which is great. But I don't know, like, Katie, what would be the difference between the PulseX front end and the Hex front end being taken down?
Did you catch the last part, Katie?
No, I'm so sorry. My internet just rogged me.
Sorry.
No worries. We were talking about if Richard Heart were to take down the PulseX front end. So, like, my question to you would be, what's the difference between the PulseX front end and the Hex front end being taken down?
One, establishment. I think the Hex front end is well established, right? There is many alternatives and people know about it. And with PulseX, then I would counter you and say, with your onboards on PulseChain, do you send them directly to PulseX or do you send them to a DEX aggregator?
If I'm sending them to PulseX, I send them to PulseX. But there are great DEX aggregators being built for sure.
So, I mean, I guess for me, and I might be a bit different to everybody else, right, including people in the chat, but if I have an onboard that wants to provide liquidity, yeah, I will send them to PulseX, right? Or I will find out what they want to do and I'll send them to something on PulseChain that suits what they want. But if I have an onboard that just wants to buy tokens, I'm going to send them to a DEX aggregator all the time because they just have better order execution, right? So if you go to Peters or you go to PortalX or go PulseX, you know, like most of the time they are routing through PulseX itself, but DEX aggregators are like this big search engine that have the ability to break up your order. So it can break it up between V1 and V2, and it just gives you the best value for your money for that execution. So like, I know it's like a catch-22 sometimes, but most of these orders do go through PulseX because it still has the most liquidity, but it's breaking it up between the two. So when I onboard people, I always send them to a DEX aggregator because I want them to get the best value for their money when they're trading. So for me, I think that question might be a little bit different to what some other people might answer. And I get that, but yeah, for me, it's always going to be DEX aggregators.
So you would be fine with Richard Hart taking down app.pulsex.com and replacing it with links to sites?
No, right? Because I think PulseX needs more time to be established. It doesn't have community built front ends, but it can, right? Like single-sided staking, you can go to PancakeSwap and fork that feature right now and customize it for PLSX. But you're talking about something that doesn't have front ends for it yet, something that isn't established in the market yet. Would it be a bad thing if they took the content and put it on IPFS? Yeah, it would be bad because it's not the same as Hex. So Hex is different, right? It's not a DEX, right? It's not having features constantly put forward to it. But it's an immutable ERC PRC20 contract. There's nothing that ever needs to be changed to it. So Hex can always be different in comparison to everything else, right? So with Hex, you can literally take its front end and host it on an IPFS server and have that content be immutable through a hash, right? But you can't do that for PulseX because if you went and uploaded PulseX to IPFS and used a hash, the second you want to implement a new feature like limit orders or anything regarding PulseX update version, right? Then you now need to do a new IPFS hash because you've just updated it. So Hex is always going to be different to everything, but that's what makes Hex special, right? And that's also why Hex is so misunderstood by everybody. It's an immutable smart contract, and that immutable smart contract can be different. It's censorship proof. It's resistant to everything, right? So no, it doesn't work. But with Hex, yeah, it does work.
So would that mean that PulseX is not decentralized because it has a front end attached to its main domain?
So PulseX is decentralized in the sense that it's still smart contracts on the blockchain, right? It's not upgradable smart contracts where it's like he's going and making state changes to the contracts. It's still contracts on the blockchain. People can still run front ends for it. People can still use DEX aggregators and pull from those contracts. But is it the same? No, it's not, because you can still add additional parameters around it and new features on it. It's decentralized in the sense that the contracts themselves are still immutable, right? But it has admin keys. It has the ability to change parameters around it. Yeah, same as like every DEX, right? It's like if you look at different protocols, for instance, like Fox, that's a good one to put up in comparison, right? It has admin keys, but it's not admin keys to make state changes to the contracts. It's admin keys to add additional parameters to whitelist new tokens on their platform, right? So, you know, it's decentralized, but people don't understand admin keys for one, and people don't understand what is the difference between having things that can be updated versus things that don't ever have to be changed. Like the hex.com front end, the gohex.com front end has worked flawlessly for years. No updates, nothing ever needing changing to it, right? So there is no reason why you can't host that on IPFS. There's no reason why you can't make that completely decentralized. There's no reason why you can't make a locally hosted file for people to download for them to protect their identity. So there's no server collecting your IP address, right? So you can use this completely anonymous online, but you can't do that for other things that have parameter updating things, all right, admin keys, things that are going to be changed down the track, because then that creates a barrier to entry, because then you're now pushing out new links all the time with new hashes, and you know, like that's the level of complexity. Versus Hex, you can do it once and go, okay, we can just teach people and educate them on what this means. Does that make sense? The way I'm trying to word it?
That definitely makes sense. I agree. It is different in the fact that it can change. But I think I still disagree that like you're willing to take that with PulseX more out of necessity. But I think that trade-off for go.hex.com, you can make that same argument because it, you know, and you say that Hex is more developed, but it's only 3 years old. Like it has a lot more to grow. And so I think that like, you know, the majority of users haven't even heard about Hex yet. So in my opinion, it's still very early. So yeah, but again, like I do like the push towards decentralization. It's just about execution and user experience. And I think, you know, we enjoy that with PulseX, that it is a trusted URL, and I enjoyed it with Hex. But if we are trying to move towards IPFS, I still think that there's ways to enhance even that user experience and offer the ability to see the other options while you're on the IPFS site, and being able to go directly there, I think would be beneficial.
I have no inside information, but like, what would you do if a new Hex front end popped up and that is what was being built, but you just don't know that yet because, you know, it's in progress?
I would hope that that's the case, because like, I mean, that's why I'm bringing this up. Like I don't take any, I've disagreed with things that Richard Hart has done in the past, and I've voiced those, but I don't take any time when I do that lightly. But I'm not like, you know, like Richard Hart is an amazing leader, but he does, like, everyone makes mistakes. And so when I think something is a mistake, like I voice that opinion, but I don't take it lightly. And you know, that's what I hope Richard Hart's listening to this right now, because I want him to hear both sides of the argument. And I do hope that, you know, a front end does get built and attached to go.hex.com.
I mean, like, realistically, it is just still one extra click, right? It's just one button that you have to press to get to the website that you want to go to if you're using the IPFS hosted, right? But I also like understand what you're saying, but you want to talk about like, it's like solely reliant on GoHex, right? And that like you're kind of taking away from the community, where I guess part of my argument is that it is so community driven. It's our job to just educate people, press one more button, or it's our job to go, do you want to locally host, you know, to protect your identity online? So I think part of what you're missing is just how strong the community movement is, right? So for instance, I'm going to bring up Maxi again. How much Hex did you guys lock up off the market with Maxi?
I think it's probably like over $1 billion.
Yeah, it was a pretty massive number, which is a huge accomplishment, right? It was something massive, but you didn't need direct endorsement from Hex.com or direct endorsement from Richard Hart to get that, right? The community backed you because you guys built a pull together contract for Hex, which is super amazing, right? And the community went and did something that was quite outstanding, right? Like for me, Maxi is a pivotal part in Hex, which just showcased how strong we are as a community, right? As a built-in consensus. So I think everybody thinks that we are so solely reliant on these things that we can't manage to do something ourselves, right? Like we can't manage to educate people about their privacy, or we can't manage to educate people to press one more button, or we can't educate people to go try something new. Okay, like it's like I understand your point, right? But I also understand it's just one more button. But for me, when you look at our community, I think it's just stronger than what people give credit for. And like you can say, oh, but most of them aren't on Twitter, or most of them aren't here. But most people go to Twitter or they go to YouTube for the information, right? They go, what the hell happened? And I need some updates, right? It's like saying that Hedron couldn't be successful because it didn't get direct endorsement. But here's Hedron out there being super successful, giving people an alternative to emergency end staking, right? The ability to sell their stakes on the secondary market. So,
yeah, I think I just disagree. I think I disagree with having a discussion about Hex.com degrades by any means like community effort. I think that, I mean, Hex.com has already been supporting community efforts on its main site. It had links from all community built sites on it. So people have had access to that for a long time now. So yeah, I wouldn't say that is degrading the community at all. I just think even if we were to keep the link site that it is now, like it can be vastly improved. Like to explain IPFS, you went on like, you had to explain for like 5 minutes about what it is. And, when you're talking about a new user, it's like, I mean, we're also talking about people that don't, I mean, most people, like once you're into crypto, like decentralization is something that you come to love, but it's like most people don't care. That's not what they're like most caring about at the beginning. So trying to like force people to like understand all of this, it's like, again, it's a trade-off. But I think we can do that in a much better way. And even with explaining what IPFS is in a sentence on the link site would be, far better. Because everyone's DMing me like, what is IPFS? It isn't clear. Most people don't know what that is. And so if we were to keep the link site, I think even that could be improved. But I would prefer a seamless direct to DApp experience. And if it's the IPFS site, I'm fine with that.
Katie, do you think it's just early days for the transition up here? Do you think, in the future it'll be, there'll be more information, like Goldkey made a lot of points around just making it easier. Again, I'm looking at it, I see the URL and I'm like, hey, that would scare me if I was a new user. Like, this is not go to hex.com/stake. I don't see a warm and fuzzy for this. I see a long, randomly looking generated. We know how the technology works, but it looks like this thing. And now, am I going to click away or am I going to go for it? I really need someone there to hold my hand. Unless, I guess framing this around, is this just, early days of things and you think it's going to be improved? Maybe this feedback even gets taken in from what we're talking about and it looks a lot different, a few months from now or a few weeks from now.
Again, I have no insider information, but yeah, I do think it will look a little bit different a few months from now. But in saying that, like, I do understand Goldkey, right? And something explaining what IPFS is on that website, yeah, that could be beneficial too. But then, like, what percentage of people stake Hex?
I believe it's like 10% currently of like user on supply. No, that's total supply. I would have to look at user on supply.
Okay. So like one of the arguments that I've heard the community saying for like the last 2 years especially is, how do we get more people to stake and see the value add in staking, right? Which still comes back down to education. It's still holding their hand through it. Like, do you know right now if you stake Hex for 1 year, you earn a higher APY than you do running a validator for PulseChain? But people are still running validators for PulseChain because it's easier for them to understand. Right? It's easier for them to go put their computer to work and pay additional electricity to earn the same APY as what you would be getting for staking Hex, right? But there's still people that don't understand staking Hex. So, I mean, there's always a catch-22.
Right. So like, why, if it's already hard to understand staking Hex, why add additional complexity?
Do you feel like telling somebody to press one additional link is additional complexity versus your personal opinion of what you preferred?
I 100% think that landing on the DApp is easier to understand than having to look at a page of links, for sure.
Didn't you say earlier in the stream that you use Icosa Pro?
I use it to mint my Hedron, but I mean, I've been using the main Hex app for 3 years mainly, honestly. But the thing with like Icosa, like the thing with community sites even is like, okay, now you're just offsetting, you're like offloading that trust to another person. So like, I don't understand, like with this decentralization push, it's like, okay, but now you're just depending on this person versus a site that has worked flawlessly for 3 years, that's built trust. Now we're pushing people to any site that is built by the community. How is that any better?
Yeah, I can semi-agree with that. Every single website that you go to, yeah, you do have to put some form of trust in them, right? That's definitely.
Right.
But that's like saying with PulseChain.com and over 90% of the traffic going to, I mean, with PulseChain.com, 90% of the traffic now is going to Go Pulse, right? That's like saying that there's people in the community that don't do things correctly or don't do things with good intent, which isn't true, right? The websites that are being put on that Hex.com is websites that are trusted, websites that are being verified, websites that have proven themselves, right? Like some of them, backup.hex has been one that's been around since the very beginning. So yeah and no at the same time.
Right. But now you're saying you're trusting that because they're on hex.com that they should be trusted. So why not just have a front end that's trusted by hex.com on hex.com?
Because now you're like, yeah, okay. It's still there, right? Like you still just have to press one link. The difference is how it's hosted. And if you want to talk about Richard Hart and his ethos is decentralization, immutable, and privacy. So in your mind, would you rather go to a website where you know your privacy, your IP address, and your data isn't being collected? Or would you rather go to a website that you know you're being tracked, right? So like if you look at Uniswap, for instance, with the SEC went towards Uniswap and said, hey, we want all this information. Anybody that interacted with Hex on Uniswap, their IP addresses and their data was given to the SEC, right? Dating all the way back to when? Because that website logged that information, right? So would you rather have something that you know your privacy is intact on, or would you rather go to websites where you don't necessarily have the right to your privacy? Do you think Richard's
like if we're talking max,
is right?
So we're talking like levels of privacy that people want to accept. Like you can obviously run it locally, which is like the highest form. It can't be shut off. That's huge. And the people that like care most about privacy will do that. Probably below that is IPFS, and that's available. But then everything below that, you know, we've been talking about community sites and stuff. But like, I trust go.hex.com because I know it doesn't track, and I know it was built by Richard Hart. So why would I not trust that over the other hosted sites out there?
Didn't you just say you also use app.icosa, which means you trust Alex? You know, that's like saying you're a founder too. You have websites. That's like saying, hey guys, don't come use Maximus because you can't trust us, right? Like the message that you're sending out is a little bit contradictory if you're a founder of a project, right? You should be going, it is a little bit. Like, are you saying people can't trust your website?
I mean, that is like a false equivalency. I never said that. We're talking about placing trust, and you've pointed to that we have community sites for people to use, but like that's no different than having it on go.hex.com. And if anything, like I would trust go.hex.com. No, and that's no offense to the other people building, like, but Richard Hart has built his brand on 100% uptime, flawless operation. People trust Richard Hart. Hex.com is associated with Richard Hart. So by default, people would trust it more. It's just like the truth. I don't know how that wouldn't be the case.
So if they trust Richard Hart, then why wouldn't they trust that what he's doing now is more beneficial to them?
They can. But that doesn't mean like that it's the best execution. Like looking at this site, like I'm sorry, it's like it's not as great of a user experience as landing on the dApp. And like we just talked about, like that's a dApp that's worked for 3 years, 100% uptime, and it built not only brand but trust. And so even to like the fact that other sites are listed, it's like, well, you might as well have a site hosted on go.hex.com, because you know, people like if we're talking about what you trust most, like why wouldn't you trust Richard Hart the most?
I just want to ask a question on that too, real quick. Goldkey, what do you think going through Richard's mind when this change happened? Like, what do you think is his main reason? I'm sure he looked at the trade-offs and stuff too, but like, what do you think he chose this direction? And again, we talked about, will it change in the future? Will it get better, friction, less friction? I mean, I can see clear friction myself in the process, but also, we could assume that it's always going to be this way, just like PulseX had its bumps, just like PulseChain, all this stuff too. What do you think is going through his mind? And what do is that one of those things we trust Richard this far, billionaire genius founder guy? Why is it even, not the feedback is not warranted or anything, but like, why wouldn't this be better?
I think the intention is there, and I think the value is there. Like back to like our original conversation, like these options do make Hex more decentralized, but how it's presented to the user is very important. And I don't know how fast they turn this around or what, but I think there's just a much better way to allow people to have these options, but also not sacrifice the user experience for people to get like on go.hex.com.
But I think you're missing like one of the key points here. Like you brought up that people trust Richard, right? And yeah, that's fair enough. Our community trusts Richard, but why should they have to trust Richard, right? Like that's the whole point of decentralization, is you shouldn't have to trust one person to do the right thing, right? It shouldn't be solely reliant on Richard Hart. And if you look outside, how many people actually trust Richard though? But it is, because
it's not. The fact that there are other options available means you don't have to trust Richard Hart. That is the key point of all that I've said, is that the fact that there are multiple options means if you don't trust Richard Hart, you don't have to use that site. But the people that do can, and they have a URL and a site that they can trust. It's the options that make it decentralized.
Katie,
so you still need a service provider to show an IPFS hash, because Chrome doesn't natively do it. So Brave browser, I'm pretty sure, does do it, but Chrome doesn't. So it's one extra click to go to something that hosts an IPFS hash, right? Which can't be done here. And then that hash is now immutable content that you're pulling from a decentralized network with one button click. The one Katie, part that I would say, go. Yeah.
I just want to hit on the point while we're talking about branding too, because I mean, I think that's a big piece of this. I think it's maybe a bulk of Goldkey's position as well. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the branding aspect of, forget the URL, forget the one more click, all this stuff. Just the fact that, people could go to this site and have this experience of onboarding and not click away because they couldn't figure it out or they don't trust dweb.link and all that stuff. Is there something to the branding aspect? Again, maybe it's fixed later, maybe it's smoother, but that seems to be something that's one of the main positions here. I'm not sure how much you've talked about it yet though.
I mean, like the IPFS, like it still has like the branding, like the URL is probably the most important, or the URL as a part of branding is probably the most important thing, because that's the thing like to indicate where you're at. The IPFS backups and the like running it locally, you still get the Hex branding of the front end. It's just not attached to the main site via the URL.
Your rebuttal or thoughts, Katie?
I have like history in branding, and that's like a completely different topic though, but that's not really what branding is. You have brand identity and then you have branding itself, and branding is literally how people perceive you. It's not like something that you want to push out. So for branding, there's multiple different perspectives that people will have. So for instance, I think that decentralized is decentralization of Hex is good, right? So that's a brand identity where other people will look at Hex differently. So like if you're just talking about like branding visually, you know, like, yeah, that one's a different topic that I don't think I should go down the tunnel of because it's just boring.
I mean, I think it's relevant. I think it's relevant though to hear on both sides. So one, again, the branding in the sense of I like that you brought up decentralization, the brand, this kind of change following in that brand, but also again the trade-offs with the process, the change, the onboarding and otherwise. I know maybe certain people will never go to hex.com to be onboarded, some will, but I guess what are the trade-offs doing this change? Like if everything, say it never happened, say this never happened, 2 weeks ago, 1 week ago, whatever, everything's still the same, it remained that way. Is that, is this a conversation? Does this ever come up later on of, hey, we need to be more decentralized to go on that brand?
I mean, I like I pointed out, like Richard Hart has pointed out that Hex has been decentralized since 2021, before that actually. So this isn't like that's like the point of like people saying it getting taken down makes it decentralized. Like we've had the options available and they were all listed on the hex.com site, and these enhance that, but like I always think we should push for decentralization. Like I do. And I think this was a huge step. Like in providing those options, it's like, okay, now that we have that, how can we optimize it so that it's a good user experience? And if we're sticking with the link site, it can be vastly improved. If not, like I could whip up designs of how I would increase the improve the experience where you still land on the site, but you're still like made aware of the ability to run it locally on your computer if you choose to, or provide the links to other community sites. So that's where I think, and you kind of brought it up early, like is it just early? I think it is, but it's a good discussion, and I think it's important. It's not just like being mad at change. It's like being part of the change and trying to help Richard Hart as best we can, like with feedback, because at the end of the day, like crypto, DeFi, it's social consensus. And the only way we find that is through communication and talking about things. And so, that's kind of where I'm at. Like, I think this has been a really great conversation. And I think, Katie, you shared great points. And we've found a lot. I think we've found a lot of agreement. Like we both agree that this is,
I was going to say that.
Yeah. Like we both agree that the IPFS backups and running it locally is a huge step and like monumental, and kind of sets a tone, for all of DeFi, that people like kind of a benchmark. And now we can try to improve that so that Hex still thrives, and Hex staking still thrives.
I think we virtually agree on just about everything, because you just said that you like it and you like the decentralized aspect. I think the thing that you just don't like is the visualization of gohex.com, because like pretty much what you just said is the decentralized aspect, knowing that the content that you're retrieving through that IPFS hash is immutable, right? Nobody can touch it. Nobody can make changes to it. You know that the code that you're accessing is the code that was uploaded. It's unchangeable. And so you just said that you like those aspects. I think your biggest thing is just visualization. And I think visualization is most likely going to change soon, right? I think it's like a stepping stone moving towards the right direction. Like just making a zip file for people to locally host it and setting up that environment for people, that's something that took a lot of development and time and resources on its own. So I think that, gohex.com's landing page will have different things. I definitely think that you can have more information about IPFS in the meantime, right? Because I think you might be correct. I don't think many people really understand IPFS and IPFS hosting especially. But I think most things we agree on is just visualization that maybe you're not the happiest about.
Yeah, it's visualization. And I do, I enjoyed our conversation about trust, and that like if you're using a community built site, you're trusting them. So why not trust Richard Hart? Like it is like a deep conversation around like front ends and what is decentralization. And luckily we have Hex that is innately decentralized. And so the things being built around it are adopting that ethos. And you know, we're being a part of that, you know, by talking about how to best foster that and still, you know, have a great product that people love.
Yeah, I mean, I think you did bring up one thing again, though, that just people I think that are listening should understand is like you have to trust the website that you're visiting, that you're not having your IP address tracked, or even your like activity on that website. For instance, they have Google Analytic things where they can actually like record your screen while you're on that website to see what you do. You know, like all different types of things when you're actually on the website. But it's not just them that you have to trust, right? When you use traditional servers, the server is still logging your IP address, whether the website is or not. So with IPFS, it's removing that, right? So traditional servers it's just one server, right? When you type in google.com, you're just pinging one centralized server for that IP address to visit that website. And that singleized server still tracks your IP address. So while you still have to trust all these third-party websites, and you still have to trust that they're not collecting your data or they're selling your data to other people, you still have to trust the traditional server to not do the wrong thing, right? And then, you know, you still have to trust the traditional server not to have a mandate put towards them that they have to censor all those websites too. So, yeah.
Both a lot of great points. I think and before I'll just get in this too before you all do the closing statements and stuff though. I think, everyone in the chat, I'm sure one of these people put up a poll that who won and lost or whatever. I don't think I'm going to. I'll let whoever else wants to do that. But feel free to comment on the video about that as well. I think prioritizing, to me, I think decentralization factor is a big one. It's funny, like I have this hybrid approach to it where I really like decentralization. I like that Hex we have that as I hope that is the primary thing going forward of more decentralization. I like the trend. However, the onboarding experience is just what I think I'm frustrated with right now. When I think about it, I'm like, man, I know it's one more click. I just don't like that one more click for people. I don't want them to be confused or otherwise. So I'm torn between the two. I think it'll get better though. I think if I had to choose, just hearing both of you lay this out again, very well done. I want the decentralization part, but also I want the onboarding. Hopefully dev team or otherwise will make changes to make it much more seamless as it used to be. So that's what I hope for. That's the most compelling, I think, pieces I got from it. But excellent debate. Again, glad you guys were able to find some common ground as well. I like how you talked about, things that, that you agreed upon and of course, disagreed as well. So closing statements. First goes to KatieeP. What do you want to take us out on as far as letting people know your position and why you stand for what you
do? Sure. I stand with decentralization and privacy, right? And I also stand with education and teaching people these things. And I will stand for locally hosting it because it's the only way you can be verifiable knowingly that what you're doing is private online. But I also agree with Goldkey, right? I think onboarding and visibility, they are key things. And again, no insider information, but I think that something might be coming soon that changes that a little bit too. But I also think that pushing out community links is also beneficial, right? Because for me, I don't necessarily send people to these websites. I send them to community ones like app.acosta.pro, right? Because it is just a additional selling factor to Hex. So I appreciate the conversation, Goldkey, and I think you had a lot of valid points. And yeah, I just stand for decentralization and moving towards that aspect as much as possible.
Agreed. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you, Katie, for coming on. Thanks for hosting Max. It's been a really enjoyable conversation. And yeah, I agree. We found a lot of agreement. And at the end of the day, like I want Hex to win so badly. Like I am very confident that it will. Very confident in Richard Hart, in this community, and I'm grateful to be a part of it. Like, the cool thing that made Hex great early and still does today is this idea of no expectations from the work of others. And the community has really embraced that and built some amazing sites, both stat sites as well as front ends. And we'll continue to do that. And I love that spirit of no expectations. It's driven our community to do amazing marketing efforts. And so yeah, I'm very optimistic on the future. And if Richard Hart's listening to this, I love you, I support you, and we're gonna take Hex to the moon. So yeah.
Shout out to Richard Hart. Shout out to the big guy up there. Pulling for you. We're pulling for you. We don't need you, although we would like to have you though. We'd like to have you. Hashtag decentralization. Everyone, that's all we got for you today. Again, comment if you're watching the replay, or otherwise comment who you think won, if that's what you want to talk about. However, the biggest thing I want everyone to take away from this is learning, just figuring out the options. Again, deciding for yourself. You heard from two people with two different perspectives. Now you get to decide. It's not about, to me, it's not important who won or who had the best points or whatever. It is, wow, I feel more informed after hearing both perspectives. In a civil way, we have this kind of conversation. So that's what I was hoping to have, and I think we achieved it. So I appreciate you both and all of what you both do for the community and the conversation. And hopefully, you never know, there'll be more debates coming up with you all or otherwise, that we can have these kind of conversations, because I think they're important and worth having. So thank you both. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
See ya.
Of course. That being said, Scivive and 5555. We are out.